This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Jeff Whitworth, K-State crop entomologist, begins the show as he talks about mosquitoes. He says what is the best for managing them and the health issues they can carry. Continuing the show is Gregg Hadley, Assistant Vice President and Director for Extension, and Tim Steffensmeier, Assistant Vice President and Director of Engagement and Outreach at K-State, as they discuss the elevation of Extension. They explain what it means for the university, Extension, stakeholders, farmers, and ranchers. In today's last two segments, they also said what led to this decision. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show talking about mosquitoes with K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth. Jeff, thanks for joining us today.
Good morning. My pleasure. Anytime.
Jeff, as we're wanting to talk about mosquitoes today, where are they at with being in Kansas?
In the last week, we've had quite a bit of rain around the state, different places, which is really nice because we have been relatively dry. And we really, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've not had that many problems with mosquitoes. But this year, in probably the last week or two, because of all the rain, I've gotten a lot of calls from consultants and growers and people that are out and about in the country because of the mosquitoes. And I will say this ahead of time. If it keeps raining, you ain't seen nothing yet because they're going to keep coming. But May and June in Kansas are generally our rainy months, and that's when we start seeing the mosquito populations pick up. By mosquito populations, I'm talking about the adults. The mosquito egg is generally laid on the surface of water, attached to vegetation or moss or something, either singly or in rafts or large numbers. Most adult female mosquitoes that are the species we have in Kansas, and I don't know, there's 40 or 50 different species in Kansas, they will lay anywhere from 200 to 300 eggs. Some species will lay eggs in a low spot that's just damp, and then when the water comes, the eggs will hatch, but they have to have moisture to hatch the eggs. And those eggs will hatch anywhere from 4 or 5, it depends on temperature. The eggs will hatch anywhere from 4 or 5 days to several weeks. Again, this time of year, they're going through development quite rapidly because the temperatures are ideal for their rapid development. So as the adults, females, as they mate and they come out and they oviposit eggs, then 3 or 4 days later, those eggs hatch. And they hatch into what generally are called wigglers. And it always surprises me that people you see standing water around, and they don't identify the mosquito larvae in the water. Sometimes the water, is just a dog pan of water, or, a horse trough is just full of these wigglers, and the grower doesn't even realize what they are. As you walk up there, they're very shy, but the breathing tube has to stick up through the surface of the water so they can get air. They live in water, they're aquatic, but they have to suck air out of the atmosphere. So they hang around upside down. They actually are filtering organic stuff out of the water for food. That's the way they eat, and they do that while their breathing tube is stuck up. As you walk up there, as the shadow passes over them, they will take off and they head to the bottom. They'll stay in the bottom just for a few seconds, and then they have to come back up to get another breath of air. So that's why they're called wigglers. When you walk up there, you see the massive wigglers moving around inside under the surface of the water. That means it's full of mosquitoes. So that's the larval stage. The larval stage, again, depending upon temperatures, may take a week, may take 2 weeks, but then they turn into the pupal stage. The pupal stage is a darker color, black, dark brown. It's a little more comma-shaped. But again, they have to breathe also, so they'll hang around the top of the water. They don't feed, but they'll hang around the top of the water, and then if you walk up again, they take off. They're really active, more so than most insect pupae. But inside there is the developing adult. So after they become pupae, then 3 or 4 days, 7 days later, they will become an adult. And they go up to the top of the surface, and the adults come out. half, generally, 50% females, 50% males, roughly speaking. They mate, and the males fly off, the females fly off. They both will take a little bit of nectar, maybe a little bit of dew or moisture, but primarily the females are looking for a blood meal. They have to have a blood meal to produce fertile eggs. So the males, they don't really feed, but they will take a little nectar for nourishment or a little water for moisture. But that's it. They don't last long. They don't bite people or animals or anything else. It's all the females. The females are the biters, and the reason they are is because they have to have a blood meal. And so they're very persistent. They're very good at finding a source of blood. Whatever they key on, whether it's carbon dioxide, whatever it is, they are very good at finding a source. So I always tell everybody is if you live out in the country, it's really difficult to get rid of all these sources of mosquito larvae. That's what you want to shoot for. You want to try and get rid of the eggs, the larvae, or the pupae before they become adults. The eggs, the larvae, and the pupae cause no problems. They don't bite. They don't carry any diseases. And they're contained within some place where there's water. A lot of the places, and I've worked on mosquito control for many, many years, a lot of the places you don't think about, one of the most common places on farms or places out in the country are tires. Old tires can hold water, and in that little water at the bottom of that tire, you can produce hundreds of mosquitoes over a 3 or 4 week period of time. So make sure you dump all the tires. If it's an old tire you're not going to use, get rid of it. If it's an old tire you're going to use maybe to post a sign on your fence or something, get a hole punch and punch a hole in the bottom so it doesn't hold water. Another place you don't realize is the eaves trough around your house. Anytime they're plugged up, even a little bit, they hold moisture, they can be producing mosquitoes. And again, you think, well, that's not a very big area, but think a 20-foot eaves trough at 6 inches of water, that can produce a lot of mosquitoes, even if it's only half full. And what these larvae need to feed on is dissolved organic matter in the water. So if they're in an eaves trough, it's dissolved, it's leaves or any of that kind of material is dissolving, breaking down. So it's an ideal source. Bird baths, all these kind of places you don't think about, just empty them out once a week or clean them up once a week if you can. That's stuff you can do really, in my opinion, really easily if you just consider. But that's where the mosquitoes are coming from. If you try and get rid of the adults, and I get this question a lot. A lot of cities and towns around the state, they spray for adult control. We've run traps. We've done studies before and after the trucks have run in many cities and towns around the state. The adult control just doesn't work. It makes you feel good because you think, we're doing something to control them. But when they put out that aerosol doesn't last very long. These mosquitoes, the females are flying in from a mile, 3 miles looking for a blood meal. And by the time they get there, the residual activity, which is very, very little of the aerosol that the city or the county put out the night before or the morning before, is gone. So it's not going to do any good. Or they don't even land on something that has a little chemical, and they just fly right from wherever they're going to you or to a bird or to a chicken or to whatever it is their blood meal is. So I get the question a lot. I've had it several times this year, and I know cities are actively spraying, and that's fine. But from a mosquito control standpoint, controlling the adults is really difficult. And then we get into all the products you can buy to put around your house, the candles and the ultrasound devices, and those all look good and they make you feel good, but they don't really do much good controlling mosquitoes. We've had data over the years, the CDC, Communicable Disease Center, we got all kinds of data to show that those may work for a little while, but they don't last. There's no residual activity there. So if you're out and you're using citronella while you're out in a party and it makes you feel good, that's fine. The best way to avoid mosquitoes, stay inside, okay? But if you have to be outside, and we tell you this all the time, wear long pants, wear long sleeve shirts. Those all help. They can still bite through a long sleeve shirt or bite through pants if they have enough time, but use an insect repellent. The oldest insect repellent is anything with DEET, capital DEET. any product with DEET in it still does a good job of repelling mosquitoes. So make sure you refresh it. If you're going to be out for 2 hours, that's about the length of time it will last. So you got to remember to refresh it. If you go swimming, when you get out of the swim pool, you're going to be out in the woods, make sure you put DEET back on. But you got to remember to keep refreshing that. So mosquitoes, they're not going to get any better until it dries out. And we just as soon it keeps raining for a little while at least, till the corn, sorghum, soybeans are in good shape. But the mosquitoes are not going to go away. It's best to try and control the habitat that is producing them instead of the adult mosquito.
Jeff, have you seen any concerns with mosquitoes this year, something like West Nile virus?
No, we usually do every year, but we're too early. We're just early in the season of mosquito biting. West Nile virus is vectored by several different species, mainly in Kansas. It's a Culex genus of species and different species, but not yet. It'll start in birds, and then the mosquitoes generally pick it up from infected birds, and then they transmit it to humans. One of the questions I always get is if a mosquito bites a West Nile infected human, can it pick up the virus from the human and transmit it? We don't think so. At least I've not seen any proof that it can, just because the virus is so spread out in humans. But it does from birds and from other animals that it spreads it to humans. So Kansas Department of Health will put out the information when we identify the first case of West Nile virus in the state, but not yet.
Jeff, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Hey, my pleasure, anytime.
That was K-State crop entomologist Jeff Whitworth. We're cutting to a short break now, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing the elevation of extension with Assistant Vice President and Director for Extension Gregg Hadley and Assistant Vice President and Director of Engagement and Outreach at K-State, Tim Steffensmeier. Gregg, Tim, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Gregg, what is the elevation of extension?
I would say the elevation of extension is kind of multifaceted. For one, it's bringing attention to all the good stuff that we have done throughout the years. You know, a lot of people probably don't realize that extension is in all 105 counties. We have over 15 million educational contacts a year in a state that's only 2.9 million. And Extension has a long history of helping people improve their lives, livelihoods, and communities. And so one is to draw the attention to what we have done in the past. As we look at it in the future, elevating extension is bringing extension to new types of problems that we can help the people of Kansas work on. So that's part of it. Part of it is kind of a literal elevating extension in our university. In fact, it is moving from predominantly being based in the College of Agriculture. It's being elevated up to the university now. And that's so that we can do this other phase of elevating extension. We are bringing in the rest of the university to be more engaged in our communities right alongside our extension professionals. And so there's a lot of different aspects of elevating extension, but those are kind of the three main ones that I think about.
Yeah, Gregg, I totally agree. And I'd add also, when you talk about the elevation of extension, it's not a new or radical idea. Our university, Kansas State University, is a land grant. And what that means is we are supposed to produce knowledge. That's our research. And we're supposed to disseminate that knowledge to a lot of people and folks. And we do that through teaching, when you think of all the ways we teach at the university. But what makes us distinct, like different than any other university in Kansas and connected to some other universities in the United States as a land grant, is that we also do engagement, meaning we want to extend the things we have, the assets we have, the information we have, the knowledge we have, in the university into communities to address community issues, problems, and opportunities. So when Gregg was saying just a second ago that what the elevation of extension does is it says there's a lot of assets, there's a lot of knowledge, a lot of young people, our students, ought to be engaged in making our communities more prosperous and healthy. That's the elevation of extension. So it's really like supercharging the extension highway. And then the other one little last piece too, it opens the extension system up to have partners beyond the university. So we have other great partners in the state of Kansas who are trying to make this place more prosperous, more healthy, and we can partner in deeper ways with those folks through this strategy like that we're calling the elevation of extension.
How did you come about having this strategy and plan for elevating extension?
I'll take the first piece, and then maybe, Gregg, you want to add the second phase. So the first phase started a few years ago. President Linton came to Kansas State University and really doubled down on the phrase I was just using before, that what makes us distinct is that we teach, we do research, and we engage. That's what a land grant does. And so we were taking President Linton around to all 105 counties, and we started with a question of, what do you want K-State to know? And you can imagine the kinds of responses we got. We've got responses from, my community is needing some assistance in this area, like housing. And a host of issues came about to surface to say, the kinds of challenges in 2025 might be different than they were in 1980 or different than they were 100 years ago when we set up some of these systems. So out of those visits came a host of priorities, and it became our strategy. And we took those sessions where Kansans talked about their aspirations and also some of the really big challenges. And we started to say, well, how could we start to do our part at the university, like take responsibility for the economic prosperity of all 105 counties, or take more responsibility for some of the really big challenges out there, whether they're around water or housing or broadband or childcare. And what we heard around the communities was not that different. There might be a different way to solve for it in Southwest Kansas, for instance, say than Northeast Kansas, but the challenges themselves were pretty consistent. So when we were around and we were having conversations, and some of them were difficult conversations, about how we could partner and how we are partnering today, topics emerged that said, oh my gosh, we have a lot going on in the university, a lot of assets that we're not doing as effective of a job of delivering into communities. And so that was the beginning of what kind of became this plan to elevate extension. And then there was a whole nother part of that process that really interacted with the extension system.
Yes, and so last April and May of 2024, we got together with a bunch of our local units, and we had some really intense conversations with community members. And those community members, some of them were those that have always used extension. Some of them were our internal extension stakeholders, like our agents, our office professionals, and our boards. And then another group was those that rarely or just for whatever reason don't partner with extension or use extension services. And so we went to them and asked them, okay, if we open up the entire university to be engaged in communities through our extension offices in new and exciting ways, what do you need the most? And we had these at 28 sites across the state, just like Tim said with the president's community visits. We got a lot of consistency across the state as far as what types of issues they would like help on, in addition to all the other things that we always provide. And so this is part of that, is part of elevating extension, is enabling K-State to better address those new and different issues that we're going to be addressing.
What does this mean for extension and the people who are within extension?
I think that what it means for people that are within extension is that, traditionally we've had 3 colleges, maybe 4 colleges that we could draw upon for our extension activities and our extension programs. now our agents are going to be able to draw upon from all parts of the universities, parts that traditionally wouldn't come through the extension network, but because that our strategic plan, President Linton, Executive Vice President Marshall Stewart, wants the entire university to be engaged in our communities, we can now mobilize a lot more assets.
As you've mentioned, hoping to have the entire university engaged, what does it mean for the university?
Yeah, well, one, I think it doubles down on our responsibility or obligation, or maybe you could call it a promise, that this university was set up foremost to advance economic prosperity, not just for a couple of people or a couple of communities or a couple of counties, but the whole state. And then the second thing I think it means for the university is we have an opportunity to demonstrate our relevance. So one of the headwinds right now is a four-year degree, is a university worth it? Is that investment needed now in 2025? Maybe the same it was needed in 1960. You can imagine where Gregg and I are on that. Emphatic yes. And that happens. The relevance thing happens when we can work at a relational level, a project level, a community level, over and over again to demonstrate that there's a lot of impact. And there's a lot of impact particularly when we collaborate. Not when we show up with the answers, not when we say here's what people should do, but when we collaborate with local expertise, when we gather around the table and say, you're having a hard time figuring out, we're having a hard time figuring out. I bet if we brought a couple more partners to the table, we might be able to figure it out together. That leads to change. And what you're going to see on this university is that starts to probably change the way we teach some of our courses. It certainly changes our research because our research agenda starts to change. Then the last piece I think is the most exciting is imagine the kind of people who are going to work at a university like this. So when we shine at this, when we become the next generation land grant, the kinds of faculty and staff and students who want to come to a place like K-State, it will lead to the kinds of remarkable changes that people expect of our university. So I think it's really significant. This isn't just window dressing or slightly changing a priority. This is placing engagement at the center of the university's strategy in a pretty remarkable way.
That was Kansas State University's Tim Steffensmeier and Gregg Hadley as they were discussing the elevation of extension. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll once again be joined by Tim and Gregg as they continue their conversation about the elevation of extension. If you are reaching your destination, however, and aren't going to be able to hear the rest of today's show, you can always find it online at agtoday.net or by searching for Agriculture Today on your favorite podcast platform. We're now cutting to that short break. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we're once again joined by Tim Steffensmeier and Gregg Hadley as we continue our conversation on the elevation of extension. Gregg, as we're talking about this, what does this mean for Kansas agriculture and its farmers and ranchers?
Well, I think that when you look at the ag industry, we are still going to be there no matter what. We're going to continue to deliver our traditional ag programs. But when we think about rural Kansas in particular, we think about other issues that are affecting those rural communities. Agriculture is the number one industry in those areas, but we still see a migration away from those communities for various reasons. And so when we think of topics that are near and dear to agriculturalists' hearts, topics like behavioral health and other issues, what this enables us to do is to bring more people with behavioral health knowledge and expertise into the solution sets for those communities to really talk about, okay, how can we improve upon rural behavioral health, just as one example.
I think that's a really great example, Gregg, around the kinds of assets and the kinds of talent you need in any community to make it whole. Another example we heard over and over again is around workforce housing. So there are shortages in housing in almost all parts of Kansas right now, and particularly housing for workforce, like workforce in the egg sector. So I think a big piece of how this directly influences the egg sector is some of the challenges around labor and around workforce. And so some of it's a housing challenge. There's also some challenges in terms of workforce skills, particularly parts of the ag sector, and then the companies and the industries that are connected that would like to scale or grow. So if you talk to folks, it's not necessarily that there aren't jobs. It's that it's hard for somebody to invest and scale their company or grow their company. Say it's a small business of 5 employees, and now I want to go to 15. Where are those 10 folks? Where are they going to live? So I think those aspects that create like a flourishing kind of small business, entrepreneurial, or a kind of sector like the egg sector need to be attended to. And we have some expertise, and we have some partners who are working in those areas, and we need to figure out a way to scale those and provide those at the community level, just like you might experience in them here on campus. And that should benefit the egg sector in really big ways.
For people who commonly reach out and interact with Extension, then, is anything changing for them?
What I think that you'll see change the most is that there'll probably be more and different purple shirts, but they are still going to go to their agent in their county when they have issues that they would like K-State's help on. And those agents are going to do their best at connecting them to Kansas State. And so I think that from that perspective, it will always be what they're used to. But like I said, just a lot more expertise that is going to be made available to their communities and to their farms and to their ranches.
Yeah, I would hope that as this develops and as we start to make significant progress on this, that our presence in local communities is viewed as the people who are connecting and convening on the big issues of the day. That it would be hard for a community to imagine making progress without having that extension agent or without having that regional extension director in the room. It's not the solution, but it's a piece, and it's an important piece. So we want to play that convener and connector role along with the expertise that Gregg just mentioned.
If people want to find out more information about the elevation of Extension, how can they do that?
There is a website at ksre.kstate.edu/elevating-extension.
Gregg, Tim, I appreciate you both taking the time to join us today.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was Assistant Vice President and Director for Extension, Gregg Hadley, as well as Assistant Vice President and Director of Engagement and Outreach at K-State, Tim Steffensmeier. I will link the website that Gregg mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.